Welcome to Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow. My name is Mariana Cordier, and I am your host. Creating bridges and alliances between the minority communities to advance political and social issues is important. Today's guests have experience in doing that, forming coalitions and alliances. Nancy Navarro is on the Montgomery County Council and is a past president of the council. Valerie Ervin has 30 years experience with unions, politics, and is an activist. Grace Rivera-Oven is a political strategist and consultant regarding various issues. Thank you for joining me, ladies.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So Nancy, what do you think about the idea of forming coalitions and bridges with our fellow minority communities in Montgomery County and Maryland?
I think it's imperative that we do that. I think it's so important that communities of color come together and identify those areas where we have commonalities and be able to then work hand in hand. Because there is power in numbers, but there's also power in amplifying our narrative and our stories. And so to me, that has always been a no-brainer. I've always felt that it is absolutely critical that we do that, and also that we, whenever possible, have an opportunity to model how those coalitions can come to fruition. There's a recent example of that with the Black and Brown Coalition at MCPS, which is super, super powerful and really important in advancing some of those agendas.
For those of us who don't know, I do, but I'm asking for the audience, the Black and Brown Coalition, what is that?
Well, the NAACP as well as Identity have come together and put forth a committee, and they began to work on a very grassroots level with parents and with students also to talk about some of the latest data from MCPS and how the achievement gap in some areas has really widened. So they began to organize, they began to educate everybody on those type of issues, and then now began to hold really important convenings where they are putting forth particular asks, very specific asks to the school system, to the county council, and to other entities. But the power is in seeing a auditorium, Gaithersburg High School auditorium full of Black and Brown parents and students. They're together really speaking with one voice. That is very powerful. And so we need to work to do that more and more. We need to get away from this philosophy that somehow the pie is limited and it's fixed. And we need to be abundant in how we approach these issues.
And the timing is so important because we have the Kerwin, the Kerwin Commission, and their recommendations, and there's going to be some serious funding behind it. So the fact that we can actually make those asks now and support the Kerwin Commission to get some funding from the state and so on to make those changes, because when you ran for the Board of Education, you ran on the achievement gap, correct? And we are still pretty much dealing with the same numbers as we did 20, 25 years ago.
Well, and Valerie, with your experience in forming grassroots movement and getting people energized and moving, do you see the communities coming together, or is there friction between the communities? I mean, are they willing to work together?
No, it's an interesting question, but I want to go back to the very beginning in your opening, where you talk about minority communities, and I think language here is extraordinarily important. And I'm not saying not to use the term minority, but I don't use it because I believe that we are not minorities. And I think that those labels were placed upon us to make us feel less than or other than. And I tend to use the term people of color because it does describe a whole rainbow of skin tones and languages and cultures, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely.
And when you look at the numbers, we're not
minorities, and I think we did not choose to call ourselves that.
No, that's a good point.
It was a label.
From those labels that no longer fit, right? Let's not stick to the old traditions.
That's an old label, and it doesn't fit, and I think young people don't subscribe to it either. And so I think we should move away from that. So when you talk about do communities of color interact with each other naturally, I think naturally, if they're not thinking about it, yes, they interact with each other all the time. But we have these constructs set up that keep us apart from each other because we get stuck in the old ways of thinking and doing, which says, if you get something, you got to take it from someone else.
Right.
Not that there's plenty to go around.
Right. But again, right, going back to how that was placed on us, that idea was also placed on us by the different areas or government or whoever you would think, right? It's like, well, and I have heard this as an advocate so many times when we go to ask for funding for certain programs. Well, if I do that for you guys, I'm going to have to do that for somebody else. And it's like, but the data shows that we're the most, affected by this than anybody else. So that kind of doesn't kind of work anymore. So a great example of communities of color coming together was through the minority health initiatives a few years ago. And Nancy, I think you're one of, you probably remember this, when there was a cut to the minority health initiatives. And I brought the Asian and the African American health programs to the table, and I said, so we keep kind of fighting for this little crumb, and that crumb keeps getting smaller. Why don't we go in together holistically as a group, and we increase what we're asking for? So let's ask for $250,000. And they said, oh, in total? I said, no, each. And we actually created a coalition, and it actually worked. And I think that's, that trust building, it takes a little bit of time. And I think that's why the Brown and Black Coalition is so key. It took a little bit of time, but now we're seeing the results, and it can be done. It's not something that it cannot happen.
Well, this goes back to narrative, and I think you mentioned it a little while ago, Nancy, and that is, as we look at the country that is so torn apart politically, that affects us locally as well. And so, when Nancy and I talk about how we got here as women of color politically, I had to get white people to vote for me. Imagine that.
Yeah.
And that was on the strength of a narrative
Right.
about how we're all in this together.
Right.
And so I like to try to figure out ways to organize people around information.
Right,
Because
to
what
unify instead of
exactly,
divide.
because what people are lacking is the kind of information that they need to make the kind of choices that are powerful choices for them and their families. And so if we don't provide them with information, then people tend to sort of like separate off and take care of themselves and not worry about like the whole community. And so I'm not engaged anymore in the county this way, but I know that the Black-Brown Coalition is a good start. I would like to see that expanded.
Be broader.
And it's a lot of work to do something like that, because that's around school issues. But Nancy spoke very eloquently a little while ago on a different show about
What? A different show?
about economic development and lots of things that affect families in the broader community. Transportation, affordable housing, jobs, all those things require us to sort of get our heads around what the narrative around that is going to be and how we bring people together around those broader concepts.
And I was thinking that last year, the process of getting to adopt the racial equity and social justice legislation really provided an opportunity for folks to examine this particular issue. Because it is about having the data. We should not get into anecdotal conversation about
Correct.
whether, Black students need this versus Latino students and why. Why should I give it to them? But we should be driven by data. And we should understand that our institutions are only strong when we ensure that they continue to be stable institutions. And so when you allow a particular group that perhaps is growing and growing in numbers to not do as well, then the entire institution suffers, right?
Yes.
So then everybody should care about this. And so to me, I have never been scared or worried about this approach to use data to say, okay, well, perhaps we need to stabilize this particular policy area with this particular community so that we can then continue to make progress on the results and the outcomes that we want. Because if you leave this community to just, perish, then everybody is affected.
Right.
The other issue with the county is that we have to stop talking about our communities as if they're niche groups that are so small and we put them in little footnotes. Because again, data, you look at the numbers and the 2020 census is gonna show another update and you realize that this is who we are. Montgomery County is this place where we know that we have a very large African American community, immigrant community and it's great. And it's awesome. It's a really awesome thing. But we shouldn't be afraid of that. We should embrace it in this, and not just in words, but also in who has access to what, and we need to own. And that thing that you just explained about this approach with the health initiatives was really about owning your power.
Correct.
Because year after year, you're coming and you're asking for these crumbs. So you're setting yourself up when the need is so great.
Right.
So there's a lot, I think, of learning that needs to take place through information sharing to equip our communities, right, with information and data, the know-how, civic education is critical, all those things, so that we can also be prepared to take charge and to really own our power.
Well, and the census is really critical to make sure that the Latino community or the immigrant community, because it's not just the Latino, there are many immigrants from many different parts of the world, get counted, and that they don't fear, being counted and think that will result in, immigration showing up or deportation, because every single number that we get counted, it means that not only does it give a better perspective of the population in the county, but the money's necessary for being able to offer services to all those that are in need, and those of us who are not in need but are, should receive certain services.
Well, that's a great example of information. So how many immigrant families know that they're safe by filling out these documents?
That's the question.
This is something that we should all gather our arms around and sort of say, not just immigrants need to be concerned about this, because if we undercount, the county suffers.
Absolutely.
Right.
So black people, white people,
all
Everybody.
people. It's all our business.
And I think that the narrative, Nancy, because you do this so well, that is not exactly out there in the broader community. Like, we suffer by not counting everybody.
Right.
So I would like to see that lifted
Clear
up in
example
some
of
way.
that.
Yeah.
And I would say as a footnote that it's interesting that, as we had an event to talk about the census, for the Latino community specifically, but one of the messages that was being sent out there was make sure to check that you are, Latino, Hispanic, and which country you're from.
Right.
So that there is a very important demographic, because sometimes there are Latino people that are like, okay, what race am I? I guess I'm white, and then that also, you may be filling out the information, but you're not capturing really the numbers.
Or you're Afro-Latino.
And the way that you should be, doing it. So you need to make sure that you know how to fill out that form, so it doesn't skew the results in that way. So there's just a lot of that kind of information sharing that needs to occur, for sure. Yeah.
But the empowerment of the to the communities is so important. But it's also, when I see programs being implemented, or any kind of initiatives, like, for example, Vision Zero, I think that's a great initiative, yet they miss to kind of incorporate communities of color at the early stages of developing strategies that now they're going to implement. Yet, when you look at the statistics, right, those communities of color are the most affected of pedestrian fatalities or crashes and so on in the county. So that's why, we supported, and I personally supported so much, the equity social justice bill that, finally came to fruition and is now policy, because you need those kinds of policies to ensure that that doesn't happen.
Right, because if not, all you're doing is chasing after,
Correct.
issue after issue after issue after issue, and that's not the most strategic way to
most
to make
effective.
change and
Right.
and to be effective. I know for sure, and when Valerie was on the council, there was a time where I even felt like, oh, okay, well, here I go again. But it was the same old situation over and over.
Right.
Cultural proficiency. Are you involving people that, are being affected? And that was the impetus for me to propose this, because I'll be gone and there will be other people who will be sitting there making these decisions. And if you don't have that data and that information in front of you, how do you know that you're making progress? Or if you don't have people in elected positions that understand these issues just because you live them every day, then how are you going to be able to address, these issues as well? So it is interesting. I think education is clearly so important, but then also who is sitting at the table making the decisions, telling the story. Again, we go back to that, makes a big difference as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because I have been around a long time, and sometimes I'm at these tables, but it's interesting because I get told, how things should be implemented in my community, and I'm just, but you're not understanding, you're not even taking into account the issues. It's kind of like one glove size fits all, and this is how we do it, this is how we've been doing it, so therefore it has to work. And it's that lack of understanding sometimes, I think, that misses the point with our communities.
Is there a chance that the communities themselves, for instance, in the Latino community, there aren't enough leaders stepping up?
No, I don't think so. I think we have enough leaders. I think we have arrived. I think, from 25 years ago till now, that's not the issue. I think the issue is, at least the way I see it, Nancy, is that we have come to a point where now we need to act on certain things. And those people who are making the decisions on doing some of those implementations in the community, they just don't have the knowledge or the skills to be able to do it in a way that is going to address the needs of those communities.
It's a really interesting thing about why is it that people do anything. And I remember learning and being trained as a union organizer, and I organized all over the South in some very rugged places.
That's an understatement, I'm thinking.
But here's the thing. People only do things for their own self-interest, really, and they do it around anger. Like, how do you move somebody from where they are now to over here? And it was my experience as a parent, knowing that in my son's school, 100% of the white kids in his school were gifted and talented, and none of the kids of color. The anger that I felt from that moved me to want to run for the Board of Education. I mean, there has to be a point at where people say, that's enough. Right now, we don't have that. Most people are, Montgomery County is a good county. It's safe, it's clean, things work the way they're supposed to work. Most people are content.
Right.
And so until the ground, the earth starts shifting to a point where people are like, wait a second, I think I don't like that anymore.
Right.
That's when you see big movements, like in China, like all over the world, when people get to the point where they're angry enough to say, I want to do something about this. I don't think we're there yet. I think there's been progress made, but I see backslipping happening.
I see a lot of backslipping.
But we also have to recognize that, there is sort of a preamble to all of this. And it's that a lot, and I can speak particularly to the Latino community, for example, that there's a lot of work that has to be done to first raise the civic knowledge of communities to understand that you don't have to wait until that moment, but that there's a lot of work that you can do to affect change, right? And that's a lot of work. Not everybody does it. And I'm sorry, I mean, there are lots of community organizations that say they're going to do this, right? But it's a lot of work. And so oftentimes there is that default where I'm speaking on behalf of this group.
Right.
I'm speaking on behalf of this group. I'm speaking on behalf of this group. The work needs to be done is to empower these groups with information so they can be their own advocates, right? And so I feel like it's a constant challenge on how do you, and it goes back to this notion of, oh, you're ahead of your time, that I used to hear that. But a part of me felt like, well, but it's important for me to be able to step up and at least try to make a difference, because it's going to take a while. And you're right. I mean, for many, many communities, this is an amazing, and it is an amazing place. I mean, it is true. Montgomery,
that's
so many other jurisdictions which they had the problems Montgomery County has, right? I mean,
first world problems.
Right, first world problems. I mean, it is an amazing place to live. But part of what it makes it so amazing is that we're willing to wrestle with these other
identities
issues,
that
and with these
dealing
serious,
with.
with these serious, complex issues that maybe other jurisdictions just don't. They just straight up don't do it. We choose to just get in there and get our hands dirty and try to get ahead of the problem as much as possible. But it's definitely it's big. I mean, it's a big challenge. But I think that younger generations, going back to the original conversation about coalition and working together, I feel like my daughters, and I have a 27-year-old and a 22-year-old. They're both girls.
That can't be. You don't
They,
look old enough.
I know, I had them when I was like so young, but not really. But no, I mean, they are really, I think, constructing a different paradigm in terms of how to build, a coalition, and that is really exciting.
All of our children are, because I watch Gracie's children, who I know your daughters. I have 2 sons. They don't even think the same way we do. Their paradigm is completely different.
Thank goodness.
It's like, why is that an issue? Like, why is it an issue?
Yeah, to them, like sexual orientation and race and gender, those are not the issues.
We used to joke, I don't know if you remember this, but we used to joke and say, if Montgomery County is having a problem dealing with us in these positions, they need to understand that we're just kind of getting everybody ready, because the wave that's coming of the younger generation of amazing, they're not thinking about that. They're not thinking about, should I ask permission to be at the table? They're kind of like, of course, I'm going to be at the table,
And then the black-brown issue too. Like my son is biracial. My older son is married to an Asian woman. His children are biracial. It's not a thing. You know what I mean? It may have been a thing 30, 40 years ago, but when you see families now, everybody's like all over the place with each other.
My daughters are Afro-Latinas, because that's the label that they like to use, but they navigate all of these identities and the political nuances and priorities of all of this. They do it very well. At the end of the day, there is this notion, I always think about this, that, gosh, we're, as human beings, we are multidimensional. It's very hard to fit into these tiny little boxes. God, they're so constricting,
And people try to do it to you all the time.
Every day, every single day. And it's like look, we're multidimensional. We can, I have been, very fortunate to serve, and as you were saying, I had to go in there and I have to make sure that I'm serving the needs of the constituents in Kent Mill who are Orthodox Jewish, and constituents that I might have in Wheaton who are mostly Latino, and it's not that hard. It's people think that somehow you can. No, you can incorporate all of that, but it is true that because of historic consequences, Black and brown communities have I think we still need to do more of this coalition building and being able to advocate to close these disparities. There's no reason why in 2020 we're still seeing this data point to widening of particular gaps and disparities that only serve to affect all of us in a negative way, period. So yeah, I mean that's.
I'm looking so forward to your daughters and sons running the show, because I think they will really create new traditions and ways of looking at things, and really put to bed the old way looking at stuff, whether we can be at the table or no, yeah, we're here. You can't kick us out, kind of perspective. But awesome. In the last minute or so that we've got, any thoughts that you want to share with the audience as to what you guys see for the future for coalition and bridges and building alliances?
Well, I think coalitions are nothing new, especially I think most people don't know that Black and brown people have been in coalition
for decades,
forever.
Yes.
Great.
And we act like it's some new thing.
Yeah, nope.
It's not a new thing.
Well, so we got to just keep doing it, doing it better.
Yeah, no, and I just supporting our young people, to be able and empowering them. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, no, I think that continuing to model what this looks like and demystifying, all of those negative
stigmas,
stereotypes for the sake of our younger
Children.
generation.
Absolutely.
I absolutely believe that.
Yes,
Yeah.
and having amazing leaders like Nancy and Valerie always help to have
And
those good
you.
role models. Well, thank you. but
Everyone cringes when they see you coming, but you have a serious impact when you write injustices or point out things that need to be resolved.
I love my community. I mean, that's why we're here. I think
Right.
most of us raising our children.
Okay.
So
Well, thank you. Hope you
Thank
guys will come
you.
back. I would like to thank our guests for today's show and the audience for watching Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow. I am Mariana Cordier. Until next time.